Learning and Student Development Center, and he is going to talk about strategies and resources for engaging students with disabilities. Take it away, Chris.
Good morning. Still morning? Yeah, we're still morning. Good morning, everybody. So I'm pulling everything up here for myself to get started. As was discussed today, I'm going to be talking about some different methods, strategies, as well as just looking at how you have content structured for your course and how you create content in different ways to engage with all those different audiences, right? Universal design of a course. And then what are some different things to consider, some different questions and some reflective items when, even for an online course, what are some options and some ideas that you can work through from there. So this. All right, so thanks everybody for being here today. When we work through this, I'm working through two screens, so if you see my eyes wander off a little bit, that is why. Just to make sure. Mary Lee, you all are seeing my slideshow screen, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so make sure. So points of emphasis, some items we'll be looking at today is looking at course content, as I mentioned. So the items within the course, whether those be the course itself within within Sakai or within the learning management system, resources and other external documents or external resources. Looking at, okay, is all of this going to be accessible, and what are some ways to make sure, or at least reasonably make sure, that the items you're working with and that students have access to will be accessible to all students. Also engaging students, what are some different things to consider about how to engage students, looking at different student needs as well as different preferences that students may have and how you can tap into those preferences and needs of what you're doing. Also, a little different than an in-person class, facilitating any approved accommodations through the Accessibility Services Office. What are some differences between a student being in the classroom, and what are some advantages that may be present for students in an online class in that in those approved accommodations. I also have a lot of additional resources and some resources itself throughout this presentation, which I'll make sure that you all have access to after the fact. A lot of different web links, and some which I will show you as we're going through this presentation, and others that you'll have access to after the fact. And then obviously, as always, some time for Q&A at the end. So I start out with a little quote. For those that don't know, Orlando Bloom, the actor, is dyslexic. So this is just a quick quote I saw there. And there are many notable figures that have some diagnosed disability or other challenges that they've experienced. A lot of dyslexia you'll see with some Jay Leno dyslexic. And if you just do a quick Google search, you can go through there. But this is one of those things that creativity is the key for any child, or really any person, if you're helping them to learn new information and engage them. So being creative, as well as just following some basics, can help you be in a spot where you feel more comfortable in that situation. So does the student. So the first item we'll look at is looking at just course content. The information that you are sharing with students, or is it available within a course? It can come in different forms and formats. So documents and resources, whether those be Word, PDF, PowerPoint, making sure that's accessible to all students. Videos, closed captioning. I know that this right now is being closed captioned, which there's a lot of transcription happening, so that's always great. Knowing how to do that is always helpful, and knowing where to take advantage of opportunities that are already there, where especially something like YouTube, which we'll get into a little bit. Images, this is something that is, I think, sometimes easily not thought about, as if there's images that you have within course resources or within a course site making sure that there's alt text available, so that somebody that has low vision or is blind still has the ability to experience an image, especially if it's meaningful course content. Just understanding how to include that if it's not already included with an image. Looking at tables, Excel. Excel is a bear for students or anybody that again, low vision or blind. Just understanding there are ways to do some basic checks on these documents. Look at Google Docs. They have accessibility settings within Google Docs. They're not the best, and I'll show you a little example of that. And then links, so inserting hyperlinks and other text links. So this is a little bit of what we'll get into initially with accessible course content and ways that you can help, again, reasonably ensure that your course content is accessible to all. First, we'll look at here is Microsoft Word. For those of you who have not used it, there is actually in the Microsoft Suite products, there are accessibility checkers. So you can actually go in and do a check for that. And I actually have an example for today. So I just pulled up, I forget where I had this at one point, but pulled up a document here. And if you wanted to in any document, you'll see I have my paragraph markers there. You can go in any Word document or 365. If you go within the file area, if you go to the info, and if you go to inspect document area and check for issues, there's a check accessibility option, which will then run an accessibility check for the entire document, and it will bring back to you any concerns that it has based on what they have in there. So, for example, you can see on the right side, I'm not sure how large, depending on how large your screen is, you will see it came with various accessibility errors or concerns. If you expand that, you'll see that the largest one to the tune of 54 errors that popped up are for missing alt text, which means that there's an image that does not have any alternate text associated with it. So somebody that is blind or has low vision, if they were to scroll down the page and work through the document and they got to an image, they would understand and know that it's an image, but they would know nothing about that image aside from that's what it is. So if I were to just pick on a random spot here, this picture right here is popping up that there's no alt text. So if this is meaningful course content and it's integral to the information you're sharing and the image means something to the lesson, to the learning outcome, whatever it may be, then you would want to probably provide alt text to that. So if you go through it, you can add a description. It'll give you the option. Or if it's decorative and it is not meaningful to the course content, learning outcomes, or the information itself, you can actually mark it as decorative. So it is no bearing for any student to actually be able to experience that image going through. So that's one option. And again, looking at Word documents and external resources within a course site or any resource for an in-person class, that's something you may have in the course site in Sakai, or you may have available otherwise, and it's just understanding how you can do that. Now, that's one way within Word that you can do that. Now, there are some stock images. So if I were to go to the stock image that I put in for this PowerPoint, you'll see you have an edit alt text option. This is a stock image from PowerPoint that I just inserted. You'll see this already had alt text associated with this information. So it's very simply explained, yellow speech bubble on blue background. So that's the description that Microsoft has put in for that. So some images, depending on where you get them from, again, anything usually in the Microsoft Suite products, if it's a stock image, is going to have alt text. A lot of third-party, well, I would say almost all third-party courses. So I know the College of Business works with Cengage. Cengage, their accessibility features are pretty spot on that I've experienced. But that's just another thing you can be looking at. PowerPoints, Accessibility checker, same thing. So you're working through, again, you go to File, Info, Inspect Document, check accessibility. So again, I've already worked through this one. There's a duplicate slide. And what this means is not that the slide is the same, but it means in this case that it has the same title. So I'll just click on this so you can see it. I have a references title at the end, and it's titled references in both. So you can actually go in and edit the slide title to be something else if you wanted to. And that's, again, just showing, again, somebody that's clicking through and working through a document like this may have questions of, if I'm referring to a slide title, and there's multiple of the same slide title, it may be difficult to navigate to that, really, for anybody. But obviously, in this case, more so for somebody that, again, has low vision or maybe blind. So, and then PDFs. So when you create a PDF or you have a PDF is in most cases just scanning an image that's then available. Now, you can create a PDF as long as you have the source document in Word, and it will retain the formatting. So in Word documents, the formatting is what's important in a Word document. And that's the accessibility feature that you're working with in a Word document, is the formatting of that document. So if you're going to use a PDF to understand if it's an accessible document, you have to know if the source itself was accessible. So we'll use the same document that I had up before. We'll just say that there are no other accessibility concerns. This is the source document that you have access to. When you create a PDF, you want to do so by going through the File Save As option, and then just click the PDF. By doing this, you can also investigate the accessibility again. This is how you create the PDF and retain that source formatting, which again is what's crucial to having an accessible document available. Again, most third-party vendors you're working with, if you have a PDF from, you work with a publisher, that's typically been vetted and gone through this process. So just to keep that in mind, that if you're getting it from a publisher, there's, I would say, a 99+% certitude that they've gone through these processes, especially established publisher. So that's a little bit about documents. Again, most of these in course sites are going to be resources or linked to other options. So that's the first part of the documents and resources. Next, looking at closed captioning. Again, I know you all are experiencing it. At least it says that closed captioning has been enabled for this. This would be a live closed captioning. So the words exactly as I'm saying it may not show up all the time. I forget what Zoom touts their certitude with their AI closed captioning, but it's pretty good. I want to say it's in like the 80 to 90% range that they provide. Again, assuming the audio is good. So using closed captioning options if in a lecture in this type of setting is great. But if you're looking at videos, one thing that you can also do, and this may be something you're well aware of, is linking to a YouTube video. So quite aptly named, how to get the transcript of a YouTube video is the source here. So if you're doing this, how to get a transcript of YouTube video, if you're wanting the transcript to be available, you can turn on and off the closed captioning settings. And this is one way where you can understand if a video that you are using as a resource or as an option for the course does have that closed captioning option. Just go to the video itself, click on the closed captioning subtitles option, and watch. So that's one way that you can make sure that there's closed captioning available. Another way, and this is a little outside of what we got here, is in PowerPoint, you can actually record yourself going through a PowerPoint, and there's actually a closed caption option or a captioning option, which then you can go back and edit that transcript to make sure that it has the words as were spoken. Again, PowerPoint, when they're going through, only has so many. I mean, it's only going to pick up probably in that 80 to 90% certitude. But with subtitles in PowerPoint, so if you were just recording yourself giving a lecture, and you wanted to make that available to students within a course site, just for reference or anything, you can go in and turn on subtitles within the slideshow area. You can always use subtitles, and you can make the settings in multiple languages that it can go to, and you can create where you want it on the screen as well, or where the slide, within the slide, those subtitles would be for those captions. And then afterwards, you can go in and edit those after they've been created within that. And you can do a lot of that within the presenter view within PowerPoint as well. So that's another way to create information, to create documents, and to create content that has some of those internal accessibility features that you can utilize. So next is images. I already kind of went through the alt text, how to do that. This is a little bit more complex image on this screen, and I will show you what the alt text is here. Again, this is directly from PowerPoint, from Microsoft Suite, so they already had this alt text in there. So if you were trying to describe this, you would be thinking, how do I describe what's going on here in a way that somebody that's not able to experience it visually would have an understanding? Again, if it's meaningful course content, that's something that needs to have that alt text. In this case, the alt text is architects working on landscape plans, conceptual site plan, and architectural drawings on transparent paper. So that's the alt text to describe this image if somebody were need to experience that that cannot see. Next is tables, and I'm not going to get too much into the details of this because there are a lot of nuances, and there's probably only a certain number of people that are using tables or spreadsheets in course content. But I will say, and I have a resource that I'll share later with this, is it's all about the way that the table is structured from the start, just like in a Word document. What is the reading order? Are the heading rows labeled as heading rows? Merged and split cells cause issues with screen readers. Again, those that are using a screen reader to experience a document. That's the big things that I notice whenever I'm working through Word or through Excel documents and other tables. It's a little bit more difficult, and for those that aren't as experienced working through Excel and table documents, it's difficult to start. But those are the main things that I've noticed with those. Google Docs, this is, again, it has a function, it has an accessibility feature, but they are not as good as the Microsoft Suite products. So Google Docs, you can go in and if you use Google Docs or you use Forms or anything like that, you can go in and there is an accessibility checker, but all it does is it gives you a smiley face if it's good, and it gives you a frown face if it's not good, or if Google thinks there's a concern. It does not give you any, like Microsoft does going through, it doesn't give you any suggestions, it doesn't give you options to change it, it doesn't even identify exactly where the issue may be in the document. It just says, there's an issue somewhere, maybe you can figure it out. So Google Docs can identify, but it doesn't identify specifically or give you any suggestions. So, if you use Google Docs a lot and that's a concern that you have for course content, it's accessible, still a little behind on giving real feedback as to how to change it or where exactly it needs to be changed. So that's a little bit different. Text links. This is all about the description and how you describe a link or a hyperlink. So, for example, and this is something I have to remind myself a lot, is if you're going to be putting hyperlinks and other types of links in there, is actually describing what it is, the title of the document, and hyperlink to the title of the document. The click here is not necessarily the most accessible way to share links. So if the link you were going to, and just because I was working with this earlier with a student, make sure if you're going to take a course outside of West Liberty University, you complete the transient application. And instead of saying click here to get to the transient application, you would actually put that hyperlink with that transient application. So somebody, again, with a screen reader is going to know that that link is associated with the transient application, not with the words here. But context of the sentence, somebody could realize that. But again, somebody that's using a screen reader is going to be that primary concern of experiencing that link. So that's the first half of what I have here. Second half is a little bit more about some things to consider. So Marilee, if it's okay, I would like to open up for any thoughts or questions after that first half of the presentation.
Sure.
That's okay. So any thoughts, questions, comments on that first half? Anything new that you may have learned, any questions you may still have or unsure about, or maybe something that you've done in the past differently that still achieve that goal? Give it a few more seconds here and then I'll continue if there's no questions.
Well, here we have a question from Dr. Kreisberg. If you were teaching and following through a figure like a diagram, should you still provide alt text?
Yes, so a diagram, you think of any visual content, right? Unless it is created directly from, like a table or data itself. If it's created directly from data and students have access to that data, then yeah, the diagram would then be a visual representation of that data. But if it's just a diagram by itself, then that's something that would need some level of alt text. And I will say that doing alt text or describing diagrams, charts, is one of the most challenging ways to do that. And if you ever have questions on that, I have some resources that I've used in the past that give some, I will say, like a basic format to consider. And then from there, you're just thinking of, okay, how do I tailor this to the specific figure that I'm using?
Mm-hmm. Any other questions? Melinda just said, thanks, I use complex diagrams, LOL. To do it correctly, sometimes the alternative text is extremely long. Like if you're doing it 100% the way you should with accessibility, it's very extensive to do alt text on very complicated diagrams.
I agree.
Vishaka has a question. We are required to provide caption for all videos in Sakai. Are there any other rules that need to be followed if we do not have any accommodation letters from a student?
So, obviously, if there's not a specific student that requires any specific accommodations, then as far as from working with accessibility services in my office, there's nothing specific that you would have to do. Really the goal, all said and done, and Marilee, you can speak to this as well, is universal design of course material and course content. That way, if there is a student that requires some level of accommodation or requires content to be delivered in a certain way, then it's not that mad scramble to redesign or reconfigure all of the content at once. So unless there's a student that has a specific accommodation need or a need itself, then there's nothing from my interfacing with me or my office is going to be required. But just generally, that universal design is always, I think, the key. That way, if you do have to do something, it's less labor intensive on the back end.
A lot of people that don't even have an accommodation will watch videos with the captioning on, or they'll pull a transcript because they're not going to be at a place they can play a video. So, I mean, it just goes back to what people's preferred method of doing things is as well. You know, even on top of, you know, having to do things because of accommodation. Now, if you're designing a course for online, and let's say you have an infographic or something like that, those all should have alternative text. So sometimes what I'll do is I'll actually create a Word document, and because the alternate text box can be difficult sometimes to navigate to, but if you have it in a Word document, then they can get the information that way as well. So there are different ways that you can provide information, but it's helpful even for people that don't have reading difficulty, hearing difficulties, those sorts of things, having materials in different formats.
Yes, very much so.
And then Susan Ridley made a comment about she didn't know that she could edit the text or transcript in terms of doing PowerPoint closed captions. So she thanked you for that information.
And then if you leave that one up there, can I respond in text to that Q&A, Mary?
You should be able to type an answer.
It's not letting me. I'll put it in the chat. There's a link to some of the subtitle and caption options that I put in the chat there.
Okay.
For Susan and others. So, okay, awesome. Thank you. Good comments, good questions.
Okay.
So speaking to exactly what Mary Lee was just talking about, engaging students, you know, part of this discussion, engaging students with disabilities, but also just ways to engage students that have different learning preferences as well. So not just the learning needs and addressing those barriers, but also the students have varying preferences that aren't necessarily tied to a disability. And having a diagnosed disability versus, you know, living with an undiagnosed disability is its own thing. You know, students may not have access to get to the right specialist to have something diagnosed. So it's addressing those barriers or those concerns that may be. So, you know, if you're looking at engaging students, and I'm using the VARC, you know, learning preference model here, thinking through, you know, when you're developing course content or you're deciding what you may use or not use as resources, you got to think through those learning needs and preferences. So if it's a visual resource or something visually that somebody's going to experience, does a non-seeing student still have access to meaningful visual content? Or also visually, does somebody that you know, has any type of color blindness, are they still able to experience it well? Is the contrast okay? So those are learning needs. Visually, learning preferences are, you know, is the image meaningful? You know, that's another way. So thinking about how you're engaging those students, can all students experience it in a way that they're still able to get the meaningful content that's trying to be conveyed. You know, auditory, can a student that is hard of hearing still engage with audio content? You know, if, again, in class in a lecture, you know, whether that be, you know, an ASL interpreter, sign language interpreter, whether that be, you know, live transcription, whatever it may be. If you're looking at an online course, again, is there audio content? Is there a video with audio? And is there you know, closed captioning or other subtitle options available for that student? And other things to consider with engaging students that may have an auditory preference is the textbook and the course text that you're using. Really, the resources, does it have an audio component? Is there an audio book available? Can a student engage with it through a third party, or, you know, can they get, you know, through a Kindle or other thing where it, you know, has some of that that text to speech? And do students, and this is something I connect to students sometimes when they come to my office, this is more on the learning preferences side, do they understand some resources that are available within their computer or other device operating systems? The Mac operating system has great accessibility tools built in, and some of that is text to speech. There's also websites where students can go to and copy and paste information into a website and it'll read it back to them. Some of the the Microsoft and the other operating systems have 2 or 3 voices, none of which may be super engaging to anybody, but there may be an option on a website where a student can copy and paste, and they may have an option of 15 to 20 different audio options to listen to in the playback, and they may find one that they find engaging, or that they are find themselves better able to pay attention to the information that's coming back to them. So, thinking of audio not just for meeting the needs of somebody, but also, are there preference options, or are there other abilities? Reading and writing. This is one that, again, you're looking at the reading is the text to speech. Can somebody experience it in that way? All students at Wesley University have access to a Microsoft 365 account. So even if a student does not have on their device the Microsoft Suite applications, all students can access Microsoft 365. It's simply just requesting it through IT. And there's an account made, and the student has access to Microsoft 365. And it has all of these accessibility components, including read aloud with documents and resources, and as well as there's also the talk to text dictate in Microsoft is what it's called, where a student can open up a Word document, start the dictate function, and they can talk away. So if a student has a preference in conversation and how they relay information, I've suggested, sometimes to students, if they're like, well, I can talk about this really well, but when I try to go down and type it or write it, I find it difficult to express what I would like to do. So a student can go into Microsoft, open up a new Word document, which is what I'm going to do right now. You'll see dictate's already on here on my ribbon. Dictate will sit here and write out everything that I'm saying, and you'll see it does so with decent accuracy. I'll say it's perfect, but if a student again has that desire and that's how they want to express themselves, they can do that, and that's one way. I actually have a close friend who I talked to, and yes, I saw a comment in there, Diana, about the writing block. I agree. Somebody who's a former student here went through the PA program and was talking about how this person dictates case notes. And I just asked, I was like, so you type those? How do you do that? And he said, I actually dictate them. And I said, oh, do you use one of these? And he said, yeah. And I said, did you use that in college at all? And he said, no, but I wish I would have understood more about the functions that were available to me or the resources in that, because I may have used it for other items. So I've talked to students all the time, when you're writing, if there's a concern there, use some of these and see how it goes. Yeah, I saw that comment in there. Read aloud is a great tool for proofreading as well. Yeah. Also a great tool if you're writing a speech, listening to the speech recited back to you. Does it make sense? So yeah, all great ways. And now this is a little bit, this is the kinesthetic, right? The last piece of that VARC, learning preferences. How do students experience that? Are additional activities available that may help a hands-on learning style? Again, that comes back to, the information you're trying to relay, the content and the outcome you want to have from that information, that lecture, that module, depending on how you're delivering it. Are there other options for students to complete an activity individually in a small group, with a friend, that helps them engage with that? And then if you're going to provide that, if someone has a physical disability that doesn't allow them to complete a physical activity like that, how do they engage, with that hands-on learning experience, that more physical learning experience. So those are things to consider, right? Is how you can engage students with that content material. There's the universal design, which gives a lot of options, but there's a one size fits all. That's why the work y'all do is really important, and how you deliver it to help give options for students to learn and engage with that material. So any other comments on any of that before we kind of move along here to the end of this? It's a lot of trial and error, and I have a lot of students visit our office who are just having difficulties in how they learn, how they study, and I will tell students all the time when they come chat with me, I'll give you a few options to consider. I'm not going to give you everything, but based on our conversation, these are the things I would suggest you try. And then let's set up a meeting as follow up here in a few days or next week. After you've had time to do this, let's see if any of these are working. And many times students will come back and they'll be like, this really worked, and I just don't like this. And I said, that's fine. If you don't like that, don't use it. It's all about what works best for you. When you look at those learning preferences and ways to engage with content, outside of if somebody needs a specific tool to experience the information. So this came from an article, or it's a web page as part of an article that I'll share as part of the resources. In the online format, we can make things more accessible to students, and the more we do that proactively, it's not only benefiting students with disabilities, but all students. Like we said, universal design and different preferences that students have in learning. And this Nicholas Gelbar is pretty renowned. If you do a web search on him, you'll see some of the different information. And he has educational testing consulting. It's his own business, so does a lot of work in that way. So facilitating improved accommodations, kind of the next piece before we get to the last bit of resources I have to share. If that's a concern, how do I facilitate an improved accommodation in an online course? The process is still the same. A student gets a letter from our office, they share it with their instructor. The instructor just has to confirm that they've received it. And then if there are any concerns, either addressing it with the student or with me in our office, and how we can address an improved accommodation in a specific setting. So that doesn't really change. Again, if the course is designed, working with e-learning, all of those items are going to be vetted on that way. But just making sure the resources you provide, whether they're resources within the course site or resources you send through the course facilitation, that's thinking of the things we talked about before, how the documents and resources are in an accessible format. If you would have somebody that has a disability, or maybe something that isn't even necessary to be accommodated in an online course, because the information itself is accessible just by design. So nothing really changes in how you facilitate it. Just calling attention if a student has an approved testing accommodation, so additional time, just going in and just however you do that, whether you do it before each exam starts, or if you go in at the beginning of the term and just go through every exam or quiz and give a student that additional time that they're approved for. That's one way. Some student feedback, and this is from one of the articles I'll be sharing, is that students with disabilities, this isn't to West Liberty specifically, but just general feedback. Students that have documented disabilities or have other approved accommodations, when all of the shift, in the spring of 20 with COVID to a lot of online or virtual learning was happening, there a large group of students that were not suited, whether it's because they needed access to accessible content, or whether they preferred certain types of learning. So a student that really likes to be in the lecture, engaged in a lecture, asking questions, be in the classroom, working with people, suffered when everything went virtually and or online. But one thing that came from it is schools and faculty were working to make sure that the content was accessible. Not only was there feedback that students that had accessibility concerns or disabilities. They're like, this is great. Now this information is always going to be accessible to me moving forward, because everyone has figured out how to do different things like the live transcription and all of that, or the transcribing, or the closed captioning, whatever it may be. So all of that's now ingrained. What they found is even the students that didn't think or didn't have a specified need or an accessibility concern were providing other positive feedback. The ability to access a transcript from a lecture, the ability to see the subtitles, to see closed captioning, the ability to use these different tools and resources and experience the content in a way that maybe they didn't realize they had a learning preference for. That was a lot of the feedback that was being shared broadly, across the nation and probably across the world as well. Is the ability to have access to that information in that way is helpful, not just to students that need it, but to all students, to find different ways to engage with the content. And always, I always say, if you're not sure what to do, if you want to float a question by me, just get in touch. I can always look over something, give you some thoughts, give you, some feedback, as well as maybe a direction forward, whether that's how to improve what you have now, or whether it's looking at a total redesign of how it was created from the start. And sometimes that can be how you work through that. So, and the additional resources page, again, some of this is referenced in what I have. And Mary Lee, everybody's gonna have access to the PowerPoint, or?
Yes.
Okay, so everyone have access to this. Some additional resources, looking at some online learning strategies for students with disabilities. This can just be helpful, just for awareness. And again, if you are developing how you're doing something with students with disabilities in mind, it may very well benefit all students. So, that universal design is not necessarily just going to encapsulate the students that need it, but it may be helping other students that you may not even be aware of. What I wish someone told me before taking online classes, I think that can all resonate in different ways for all different people. 7 tips for success when taking online courses. Again, looking at the audience, and teaching an accessible online course may be one of the more interesting resources you can look at later on. But here's some of the references. Again, I think everything is referenced here that I brought up or that I talked about. So even how to make your Excel documents more accessible, I didn't go into that in great detail. But again, that's one of that and very detailed alt text are some of the more difficult things to work through if you don't have a good source document to start out. So that is what I have for today. So open it up for questions, thoughts, comments. Thank you, Dr. Wheeler.
That was great information, Chris. And in this space as well, if you're working with us on an online course, these are some of the things that myself and the instructional designers will work with you on, is making sure that all of the resources that you have, your videos and all of that, do meet accessibility. And that's one of the some of the very old courses before folks actually worked with an instructional designer to develop them. Some of the things that we find in those, and why hopefully in the next year or so, we're going to have a program to go back and actually work on refreshing all of those old courses, is people use, like my antenna went up when you talked about using fonts and things so that people can see the colors of fonts and all of that. Like using yellow when you're typing something on the screen is bad. I can't read that. I can't read that with my old eyes anymore. So if you have somebody that has a low vision or a vision problem, they're never going to be able to see that, or fonts that are too small. Those are all the things when we're designing an online course, we work with you on.
Well, thank you everybody for the great comments. Thanks for inviting me to be here today, Mary Lee. And yeah, glad to do it. And if there's any follow-up, please let me know.
Okay, great.